Hello, everyone. I am Ann Olin, Managing Director with the TIAA Institute, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Ruth J. Simmons, who currently serves as President of Prairie View A&M University, which she joined in 2017. She is the first woman president of Prairie View, which is the second oldest public institution of higher education in the state of Texas and a historically Black university. While she was last among her siblings as the youngest of 12 children, President Simmons is quite used to being the first. In 1995, she became the first African-American woman to head a major college or university upon being named president of Smith College, the largest women's college in the United States. At Smith, she established the first engineering program at a women's college. In 2001, she was selected president of Brown University, making her the first African-American woman to head an Ivy League institution. Her accomplishments over the course of her career are many and marvelous. She was selected as this year's TIAA Institute's Theodore M. Hesburgh Award in recognition of all she has done for higher education, the institutions she has served, and the many, many, many students she has nurtured. But she was also selected because of her character and the leadership excellence she embodies in the spirit of Father Hesburgh and the greater good. President Simmons, thank you for this opportunity to speak with you. And I'd like us to begin by addressing what leadership in excellence in particular means to you. What do you see as the highest calling of a higher education leader? And how has your vision of leadership evolved over the course of your career?
Oh, mine. First, Ann, let me thank you for your introduction. And I'd like to thank TIAA for this wonderful award. Obviously, we all admired very much Father Hesburgh, and it's a singular honor for me to receive this. Well, when I think about higher education, I think about first our civic purpose. I cannot imagine what the nation would be without the performance of higher education institutions over the centuries, really. I think about John Adams and his concern during the colonial period that we have enough people fit for democracy. And by that, he certainly meant knowledgeable enough, perhaps open-minded enough, dedicated enough, having the right ideals and the right commitment to our way of life. I think it's much the same today, to be perfectly honest with you. I think about how we serve the world and how we serve our country. And how we do that, I think about access as being the most important element of that. Having enough people fit for this democracy is the most important thing. Secondly, we know that universities are devoted to advancing scholarship and research, which leads to improvement in society. But we also know that we need to have a wide variety of people participating in that scholarship and research. And so while access was not our principal calling in the early days of higher education in this country, it certainly is today. And I'm delighted that it remains one of the most important elements of our leadership today. I do think that as time goes on, we're going to be called on to serve more vigorously and more consistently as a kind of paragon, if I dare say it this way, of values and virtue. We have very quickly these days seen great institutions eroding in their integrity, in their fidelity to their purpose. And I continue to believe that universities ought to hold the line, becoming and remaining one of those places that people can really count on for consistent high purpose, consistent values. And so the things that we tout, of course, as universities are transparency, truth telling, which I speak about quite a lot, and fairness. All of those are elements that if we work hard to preserve those, I think we will be of service to society.
It's a long list of responsibilities for leaders, but I would agree that they haven't changed that much, but perhaps they've gotten even more important today.
Yes.
You mentioned a few things that are segues into my next question. And I've heard you speak about how deeply committed you are to social justice and to values ingrained in you from childhood, and
Yes.
in particular by your mother. And I want to connect that to the need we all recognize to make access to higher education and degree completion and overall success more equitable to all students. We know that's a passion of yours. Can you share some more concrete thoughts and ideas on what is needed to advance positive change in that arena? What can we do?
Well, first of all, I've been concerned for some time about the fragmentation of higher education. That is to say, we willfully, within higher education, draw sharp distinctions between types of institutions. Though there are institutions that are extremely well endowed and have the capacity to offer all kinds of services and support to students and all kinds of wraparound services. We have institutions that are established for narrower purpose. Our community colleges do extraordinary work in bringing students into higher education. We have special mission institutions that work hard to provide access and to educate in the context of a very particular mission. Our institution is one of those. So my concern is that we think of education in hierarchical ways. I think that does not serve us well. And so some institutions get the benefit of being thought of as highly desirable and quite proficient in carrying out their mission. Other institutions with far less resources get relegated to kind of also ran institutions. And this is, in my view, poisonous for our goals. What is our goal? Our goal is to make it possible for every individual qualified to be educated, to be able to do so. And you've heard the expression, meeting students where they are, as opposed to setting a table and only inviting people who know how to observe table manners. That's not what we want to do. So one of the things I call for often is that as educators, particularly as leaders, we cease drawing these fierce distinctions among different institutions, and instead work to see how we can cooperate more to achieve better results. There are students, bless them, who are able to start their work in community colleges and then go all the way to the Ivy League, and then from there all the way to the top of their profession. We should never forget that. The fact that someone at a point in time has limited resources and limited access doesn't mean that they should have that for all time. So that flexibility among institutions is incredibly important in my view. So I continue to urge institutions like AAU institutions to be mindful of the importance of admitting community college students in their admission classes, because I think it makes their purpose more believable to the public, and it enables them to help students who really do need help. So I think that's one of the things that I would say is most important to me.
Those messages resonate so much with me as a mother of 5 children who have gone to quite different kinds of institutions of higher education. I always appreciate when leaders of those institutions and other institutions buoy everyone up, so that the institutions are recognized as all serving very important roles, and one is not necessarily better in all ways than the other. They all serve us, and I appreciate that so much that you said that.
But I do think that, and I elevate this issue to the level of high importance. In higher education, we love to talk about and tout all of our magnificent accomplishments. We love to talk about the students who are achieving at the highest end, and they're winning awards, and they are have high GPAs, and they go on to advanced study, and we love to tout that. But to me, every learner matters. And for those learners who are struggling and they are able to continue advancing, I try to make sure that people take the time to acknowledge that they're on that path. They may not be as far ahead as the high achieving student for a host of reasons.
Right.
But they're on the path. And what we want to encourage people to do is to stay on that path, because that's when we really mine the incredible talents of our population, by helping people to stay on that path as long as possible.
I love it. That's wonderful. You came out of retirement to to come into service at Prairie View. Is some of what you just spoke about part of what compelled you?
Yeah, it's hard for anyone who's had the kind of childhood that I had to stand apart from the young people who go to places like Prairie View. How could you do that, knowing the path that they have traveled and the path that they will yet need to travel? And so, to me, seeing these young people reminded me greatly of of my childhood, and frankly, I understand and acknowledge every day that but for individuals that I encountered in the public schools in Houston, teachers and individuals, faculty in college, I could not possibly have anticipated being able to go to college, and certainly not have a career similar to the one that I have had. It absolutely would have been impossible for me. I'll tell you what my aspiration was when I was a child. My aspiration was simply to be able to finish high school. I thought, like everybody else that I knew, that I might be able to get a job after high school working in an office, but I also knew in that era that I might have to work as a maid. So that was that's the way I thought of myself and of my opportunities in a deeply segregated society. The youth today don't have exactly the same issues with segregation, but nonetheless, they often come from neighborhoods and schools where they anticipate their lives will be very circumscribed because they have not had access to the full array of resources that a typical student will have had. So I love the fact that there are places like Prairie View serving young people like me. And the fact that we have that is so critical for the country. As I said, access in this country, a country of immense diversity, is absolutely the highest priority, because in order to avoid being a divided society in which we can never work together to shape the future of our country, everyone has to have access. And where you have groups of people who lack access, you will have a troubled society. And so that's, to me, that's the most important thing.
The perfect takeaway, one that will resonate, I'm sure, for many listeners. So you've been at the helm of Prairie View for about 5 years now, I think, with the last 18 months among the most challenging for higher education and for society due to the pandemic. How are you feeling about the future for higher education for our country? Do you anticipate transformational change or pretty much a slow reversion to status quo? What's going to stay? What's going to change?
Well, of course, I think none of us has ever experienced a time like the present one, with the confluence of so many negative factors that impact the lives of our students and their families, and frankly, the health of our institutions. It's been extraordinary, this period. At times, I felt quite discouraged by these circumstances. But as in all instances, when I see instances in which we have many negative factors, my predilection is to say, well, what do we do? Let's not just think about how terrible things are. Let's devise a strategy for taking advantage of what's transpiring in this moment. And so that's what we have tried to do, and I think to some extent quite successfully. We did not expect to move to online so quickly and so dramatically, and yet we did. And the fact that we did so with our faculty having to retool and to understand technology in a way that many of them had not ever anticipated they would have to do, how can that not be something that becomes a lasting benefit to a university? Because I talk about my students learning, but we can also talk about the rest of us learning too. And so when you're forced in a period like this to make such adaptations, and to, in the context of still wanting to serve your students well, you're taking something away from that you can use subsequently. And so I'm very confident that faculty will have learned the advantages of hybrid means of delivering instruction. I'm confident that universities will learn that there are less expensive ways for us to deliver instruction. That's almost heretical for me to say that, but I do believe that one of the things that we can turn our attention to is how can we achieve some real economies that will help our students reduce the cost of education, because one of the critical issues we face in higher education is the cost, and how that is now really circumventing the ability of so many students to be able to complete their education, just the sheer cost. And so could we use what we've learned about modalities of instruction to make adjustments that would result in less need for building out physical space, perhaps less need for students to have to be enrolled in face-to-face courses exclusively, um, uh, more more courses and maybe courses of study that offer a complete online option, or a sequence that is completely online. There are so many possibilities. And so
Yeah.
I'm hoping that we will have learned how to begin to exploit that. We also have learned a lot about the serious problems that we have in this country and how desperately needed are universities' interventions in helping people understand how to navigate difference. We are not nearly as good at that as we thought we were. And so now the question is, as the country seems at times to be coming apart over political issues, over a difference of opinion about inclusion and diversity, over policing, over a host of things, over historical iconography and how we deal with the past. There are so many issues that are pulling us apart. Um, Universities actually are one of the few spaces in this country where people can actually have the kind of deliberation and debate that is so desperately needed. So we need to model that through our public programs. We need to model it in our classrooms. We need to model it as faculty and as leaders. All of this ought to be one of our prime responsibilities as universities. I regard that very much as pivotal in our public service, our civic purpose, to be able to do that. And finally, we also learned during this time that justice has really been staged still for a very significant number of people in the country. What does it mean to have full access to the fruits of liberty and justice? We are beginning to understand that anew. What role can universities play in helping society understand that? So our new Center for Race and Justice is working with our state legislature, with police departments, with other entities to bring insights into what we can do in order to improve how we're functioning as a diverse society.
You put a fine point on what you just were sharing in an op-ed you wrote not so long ago, where you shared your view that the education sector has not done enough to teach Americans about the causes of systemic racism and to prepare us for its consequences. You just offered a few suggestions for what might be done in the higher ed sector to bring about some positive change. Say a little more. Tell us a little more about your center. Who's going to be impacted by the center, and is something like that scalable? Tell us how to be the change.
Well, ideally, in a university, one would not need a center because the curriculum would be thoughtfully constructed to ensure that students are exposed to the kinds of to the history of the world and the nation, and that they would be in environments in which probing discussions would take place about how one addresses the issues that we're confronting. I always remember one incident in my undergraduate years when this hit home for me. I was very passionate, as young people are, about the issue of apartheid in South Africa. And I was in a class, a philosophy class, classical philosophy class. And as you know, happens in courses, the professor was drawing upon modern day life to discuss some of the principles in the class. And so the question of apartheid in South Africa came up. Well, as you might imagine, virtually everybody in the class railed against the unfairness of such a system, and I was 100% in their corner in terms of the way that I viewed apartheid. And then suddenly, it seemed out of nowhere, a girl raised her hand, and she happened to be South African, white South African, and she made an impassioned defense of apartheid in South Africa. It was quite stunning. And so she made me have to do something that I ordinarily would not have had to do, and that is to stop and to take in a different opinion and to ask myself where my conclusions might be lacking, and so on. It seems to me that's the kind of educational experience that you want to have. So what should we be doing as universities? We'd be making sure that that happens for our students, that they are not given a pass so that they can waltz through their studies, congratulating themselves for having the right ideas, for being on the right side of everything, and never having to explore whether or not somebody else's opinion has some merit. This girl never convinced me that she was right, by the way, but I have never forgotten her and that experience. And I remember nobody else in that class, nobody, but I remember her.
Wow.
That's the kind of education I want our students to have. And we should be more intentional as universities when we claim to be educated people. We should be more intentional about putting those kinds of experiences in front of our students. That ought to be certainly a part of the way we shape our curricula. Also, you know, look at all that's happening across the country in terms of students calling into question the iconography and the values of institutions. Why do you have a Confederate soldier statue on your campus, they say, when we have to walk by it every day and tolerate the genuflection before this figure? How do you think it makes us feel? Well, I mean, that's a question that you need to engage as a university and not turn it away. One of the things that we did as universities when universities were integrated is we said, okay, we've opened the door. Now, your task is to come in and to adjust to who we are and not shake the boat, right? But that's no longer possible because, frankly, the people who come to our universities today will not tolerate that for a minute. So we owe them answers. We owe them truth about what it is we're trying to accomplish and why we reify certain things and ignore others. That's part of the truth telling that I was talking about earlier.
You know, everything you just said is in the context of today, but I so enjoyed hearing you tell a story about starting up the Afro-American program. I guess it was at Brown, and the way you
at Princeton, probably.
Oh, okay. And the way you did that, though, was by first bringing in outstanding, but not well enough known Black writers and scholars. And I think you began with Toni Morrison. And what an impact that must have had on students and faculty, and just more of that exposure to the woman from South Africa and being exposed and willing to listen and then evaluate the differences of opinions and try to get to some common ground.
Yes.
That's
And I think, by the way, while it's important to bring in faculty, diverse faculty, I think administrations often forget that our actions signal what we value. And if, as an administration, you're not willing to tolerate an outspoken faculty member who disagrees profoundly with the direction of the university, then we are not upholding the values we're espousing to our students. So that has to be a complete genuflection to the value of openness, to the value of difference and what it can teach us, and so forth. Not just over here in the classroom, over here in the dormitory. It has to be complete.
Yeah, part of leadership excellence. I just want to, I'm just personally so curious. Who are among those you admire most for leadership excellence and why? You can just give it one or two answers.
You know, I do not myself desire or expect perfection in leadership, and I advocate that we shouldn't. None of us should. For the most part, I respect aspects of what individuals do, and so they may achieve in one area and less so in another. For example, I tend to have a strong bias toward action and a consequential action. And so when someone takes action that I admire, I applaud them as a leader. I think that the model of expecting leadership to be 360 degrees of perfection is not possible, frankly. And so we fail at some things and we succeed at other things. And so I look at what people have done to change the direction of their institutions or change the direction of the world. I admire Lonnie Bunch, who is the director, the secretary of the Smithsonian. And I admire him because for centuries, the story of African Americans in this country was not told, or if told, it was told incorrectly. I admire him because of his tireless work to get the National Museum of African American History and Culture established on the Mall of Washington, D.C. The symbolism of that act is extraordinary, frankly, because it's almost as if when that museum opened, finally people could say that African Americans were full citizens in this country, because there was a place for them at the heart of the nation's capital. Obviously, there are other people like that who've done extraordinary work. I admire Janetta Cole. There are a lot of reasons to admire Janetta Cole. One is that she's just so much fun. She is not only a scholar and a leader who has done a number of different things that have been so important. The African Museum in Washington, Spelman College. But every time you hear her speak, it makes you want to jump up and do something, right?
It's so true.
So she's entirely inspirational. So I admire people who can inspire in just that way. I admire people in all fields, not just in particular fields. Toni Morrison was someone who, to me, though a writer, was an incredible leader, because she managed to influence so very much. And what a lot of people don't know about her is that a lot of the people who got published when she was an editor at Random House got published because of her. So before she was a writer, she was helping other people get published. And because they got published, they made their way into the academy often, and they in turn influenced a lot of other people. So I like people who have a sense of what they can do through the agency of other people that they help. And there are lots of writers who do that. There are a lot of artists who accomplish that. There are a lot of educators who accomplish that. And I have immense respect for them for being able to do that.
Thank you for sharing those personal views. So interesting. Gives me chills hearing about these other outstanding leaders. We're going to wrap up with one more question. And that's, I'm going to use you to help the next generation of leaders and ask you for what advice you might give to the next generation of higher education leaders that might help them become the kind of leaders we recognize with the Hesburgh Award, leaders like you. What advice might you offer?
I was going to say somewhat facetiously, not to listen to other people when it comes to the most deeply felt values and ambitions that one holds. I've been given so much bad advice in my life that had I listened, it would have deterred me from doing almost anything that I've done. So starting with the fact that I fell in love with French and French literature, and I was told that that was not a field for me, that I should do something practical instead. And for years, as I was making my way through my program, people scoffed at what I was doing. But you know, I stuck to it, obviously. I was told when I was at USC and decided that I wanted to understand at a profound level what a comprehensive excellent undergraduate program was. And so I left USC and took a very substantial cut in pay to go to Princeton to be a learner again about undergraduate education. And people said they thought I was making a terrible mistake. I would never advance in my career, but I did that. Then I had a wonderful time at Princeton, but I decided, well, I've learned a lot about undergraduate education. I'd love to take what I know and go to Spelman and try to build that institution alongside Janetta Cole. And of course, people told me that was a disaster, that I would never again be able to work in a major university if I did that. And when I took up Afro-American Studies at Princeton, they said the same thing. Well, you know, what are you doing that for? I mean, you're a French specialist. Now you're going to go and direct Afro-American Studies. If you do that, you'll always be pegged as, you know, doing African-American studies, and that's not good. And so, and then when I went to Smith, people said, "Well, why are you doing that? That's a women's college. You could be president of a university with men. Why would you want to go to?" You see what I mean? I mean, the propensity of people to pass on to you their particular biases is very high. So I always advise young people to learn first about themselves. What motivates them? Who are they? What shaped them? What can they be committed to at a very deep level? And if you have enough of that knowledge, you'll have the fortitude to be able to withstand all of that bad advice that you're going to get. The second thing I say to them is, of all the things that you can be armed with in a leadership role, your ability to remain who you are and to defend that against people who want to change you is invaluable. And so I always think about my mother and the fact that she was a maid and she was a very wise person who taught me to respect people. That simple thing. It seemed so simple at the time. And so that's what I've lived on. I've lived on a diet of my mother's advice for all of my life. And it served me very well, even in moments when people told me I was wrong about what I was doing. So having that grounding is very important because you get knocked about quite a bit in leadership roles these days. People want you to sign things that they think are very good. People want you to compromise in ways that you know to be unworthy. People want you to be a paper cutout. So don't be a paper cutout of the person that you could be. Be real. Take from your growth as a human being all of the essence of what that is, and then use that in your leadership.
So be true to yourself, respect others, respect yourself, and don't always take other people's.
Yes,
I think that sums it up. Thank you so much for your time. We at TIAA, and I know I speak for ACE as well, we are honored to count you among our Hesburgh Award winners and are so grateful for all you have done in your life to share your gifts to make the world a better place.
Thank you.
And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.